Welcome to A Walk in the Park with Gil, where every other week I invite fascinating people to talk about cities. Sometimes it's about parks, others about walking, riding bicycles, using public transit, or children and elders in cities, public health, the environment, and much more. My name is Gil Penalosa, and I was born in Bogota, Colombia, where as commissioner, I led the design and construction of over 200 parks and took a small program of open streets called Ciclovia and turned it into the world's largest pop-up park with 121 kilometers, 76 miles of car-free streets where people of all ages and backgrounds enjoy the presence of each other as equals. 17 years ago, I created 880 Cities, a non-profit organization based in Toronto, Canada, where I live. Before the pandemic, I had worked in 345 cities in all continents, which is why my master classes now are called Gil in 345 Cities. This bi-weekly webinar is a way of giving back, always free. Invite anyone who cares about cities and people to join us. Your comments and suggestions are always welcome.
Thank you, everyone. We acknowledge the land we are meeting in is on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, Métis, and people from many nations. We acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Before we go into today's session, I want to remind you, 2 weeks from now, we are going to have a session that will be a wonderful link to this one, Vision Zero, from talking to doing, how to save lives and have more enjoyable city. Our guest is going to be Leah Schaum, who is a graduate of Duke University. She spent 2 years in Sweden studying Vision Zero, and then is the founder and director of Vision Zero Network, which is the leader all over North America. Then 2 weeks later, we have Sub-City, Building Density for Everyday Life with the author, David Sim. And then in September, we start with getting more people riding bicycles more often. But today, we have a fantastic session. So let me here stop sharing. Okay, Dan, welcome. We have Dan Burden, who is our guest. Dan is a fantastic person. As a human being, is magnificent. He has also is a world-renowned expert in walkability. I have the privilege to work with Dan in many places and to learn from him. He is now involved with Blue Zones, which is about living longer and better. And in our cities, it's almost a pandemic, except that we don't treat it as that, and it's happening every day. And people of all ages and all backgrounds and all incomes are being killed. Also, we've seen in some of our past sessions that the key element, the magic pill to live healthier and happier is physical activity. And there is no other way that people are going to be physically active other than walking or riding bicycles as a normal part of everyday life. But then we need to have walkable, green streets, and the link to health, wellness, and economic vitality. Dan, welcome.
Thank you, Gil. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while, and really appreciate the fact that we have an international audience today. I'll go
Well, Dan, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, okay. Let me do that. First and foremost, I am not a technician, never have been. I got into this field close to 50 years ago, just wanting more people at first to ride bikes, then walk. And the trade or the craft grew up around me. So I like to think of myself as a person who comes in early in the process and help inspire, help bring all of the issues together. I'll talk a little bit about blue zones in this presentation, but let's get into the presentation. Let me see what I need to do to advance the slides. There we go. Okay, so I will introduce walkability in its broadest context. Talk again about what the Blue Zones approach is. This is where we're able to implement many of the things that each of your communities, your neighborhoods or cities are interested in, but to prove that it works. I want to add the economics to this picture. And so I'm going to talk about thriving cities and then really get into placemaking, greening, and point out how we should be building our streets very differently. And then how do we bring about change? It's pretty straightforward to link health on these topics. And I'm not just talking about individual health, also community health, but planetary health. All three fit together. And I celebrate the best practices that are going on anywhere in the world where people have figured that one out. I really want to, every audience I reach, to develop that sense of urgency. And we've got to act soon and with more boldness. But I also want to point out in my presentation, this is nothing but the tip of the iceberg, that if we are to get into this topic, we have to understand its complexities, celebrate them, and be in love with the changes that we seek to make, because this is going to make the big difference. And with that, also to boil it down to a simple cartoon, a great friend of mine, Ian Lockwood, I think sums it up. You know, while we're in our garages or virtual sessions or whatever, trying to figure out the solution to our problems, the kids already know. and kids have always known the answer. We have made some big mistakes. And when I say big, I mean colossal. We've been planning our cities for cars. And by doing that and failing to plan for people, we've done nothing but add more cars. And now we're starting to figure that one out, one person at a time, one discipline at a time. But I like to sum that up visually. On the left is Houston, the least healthy city in the world, I'm told. And but on the right is Guanajuato, where they celebrated the advent of technology when cars came by using their old silver mines and sending them underground and kept their city intact. Think of the difference. Mexico is the healthiest nation in all of North America, and for good reasons, is the happiest as well. And so we need the principles of retaining the traditional form and stop trying to chase after traffic. I photographed this scene on the approach to the final drive to the high school. Notice there's not a single person walking or biking, even though the sign says to walk. Well, the answer for this is very simple. If you don't join this traffic queue, you'll be there for 20 minutes, because we only designed for people to drive, even though it was a series of other mistakes that led to everyone having to drive. So I like to say, setting the stage for my talk is having less of cars. It requires more walking, more biking, more placemaking, more of everything that we're going to talk about in this session. The formula is very simple. Pump less money into those things we don't want and put our resources, our finances, our talent in the things we really want. And we'll get there. And the towns are proving that. So let's set a overall setting, what we're striving for. We invented cities for a reason. We wanted to maximize exchange, right? The change of goods, service, culture, friendship, knowledge, everything. And to minimize our travel, but we're right now just doing the opposite. We're maximizing travel and minimizing our exchange. David Indwich really figured this one out for us. But now let's get into the walkability. What is it, and why do we need it? First of all, there is no better formula for health than walking. it's got all of these amazing benefits, whether we're wanting to maintain our weight or address serious diseases or some of the effects of aging. It's walking that brings about this quality that we seek. We refer to this as aging in place. And that means really that we're designing for our elders. And by doing that, and this is the really cool thing, we end up designing for everyone. So whether we're young, middle-aged, in our senior most years, by designing for our seniors, we are accommodating all people. And we do that by design. Now, one of the most important things, and I think everyone on this presentation has figured this one out, it's not about sidewalks, although we need them. We need them because we did such bad things to our streets to begin with. But people are not going to go out and walk in a hot, harsh environment. They want to be separated from that traffic. They want a sense of they're going to a cool destination, that they're going to have some shade or oases of shade, depending on the climate. So I'm going to use some examples. One of the first examples I like to use is Espanola Way. It's in South Miami. And a good friend of mine worked to transform the street on the left to the street on the right. The buildings were already there. The street was already there. It was just a matter of transforming that street. She did so well that she walked away with mega millions of dollars as the investor for that. I also say it's about going out and watching, why are people behaving the way they do? The woman that you see is older, being more cautious. By the time the younger folks got out of the street on the other side, she was just finishing stepping into the street. And again, this is part of observing to see why people do what they do. The woman in the top panel is doing what I call stealing home. She's hedging her bet because she knows she walks slower. And the gentleman in the lower panel had to come back from the intersection because there was no ramp. He needed a way to ease himself into the street by leaning against a car. So these are some of the things I've learned just by watching. And now, as we go through walkability, I want to talk about the key components. It's not sidewalks, it's connectivity. You cannot walk if your streets are not well connected. We need a certain density in order to make it pencil out and to have people walking. We need diversity, which can be easily expressed as a mix of uses. And then, of course, we need the quality of design. So I'm going to use this as an example. Tyson's Corner in the Washington, D.C. area became this. And it's got all the parts, but the parts don't make the whole. And in this case, it's not a city. It isn't. People have to drive everywhere all the time. They can't get across the street by walking. But nearby in Washington, D.C., same parts, but put together in a sensible way because they were using traditional practices or principles. So this is truly one of the more walkable, bikeable, transit-friendly cities in our nation. In fact, it rates very high on walkability. I want to now get into the health components because it's one of the most powerful ways to sell what we're doing. But again, we're going beyond healthy people, healthy communities, and of course, the healthy planet. My boss, Dan Buettner, who has now 4 or maybe even 5 covers with National Geographic, has gone out and figured out where are the healthiest places in the world and what are the common principles that bring all of these things that include happiness and health and longevity together. It's a pretty simple formula and one that I want to emphasize here by focusing on health. And I think in order to sell this whole concept or notion to most people, they can respond to the fact that we can control as much as 80% of how long we live, how happy we are, and how healthy we are if we live in a good place. And it's so important to understand that genetics only control 20% of our longevity and our health issues. One of the other principles of blue zones is that the people who have lived the longest and the happiest belong to the right tribe. They join a cluster of folks that really help them socialize and for them to set their lifestyle and truly find that niche in your own lifestyle with the right people, and you will live longer. But it's got to be the right niche, not people that are not choosing to live healthy. So what is a Blue Zone community? We have 71 so far, more coming. And in this case, this particular town, we were able to repair the main street you see behind us in the immediate foreground. But we had the opportunity to take that very wide road up ahead, which carried very little traffic, and transform it. The state DOT didn't want to do it. They just wanted to do a quick fix and just pave it exactly the same. But we insisted because the community was together. They were acting in unison. So we were able to knock it down to only 2 lanes, add far more parking, and in this case, bike lanes. And now we set the space for the businesses. The roundabout, which you see, will come later. It takes longer to get funded, but now this is a model that the state, the Minnesota DOT, uses in other counties to prove that these models work. I've got a closing slide where I want that model to be captured here. Another Blue Zone community, Muscatine, 20,000 population, was facing, again, the same opportunity. We worked their aspirations with them. It always comes from inside the community. And this is what they have now been able to transform to. They've widened their walking and biking opportunities. They've narrowed the street crossings. They've slowed the speed of traffic. They've created a sense of place. They've attracted $1.5 billion of new investing as a result of their working together. So I like to say that if you use the right formula, you focus on people and place and set the policies for that to occur, then we're going to capture that. We, in Blue Zone's world, refer to this as your life radius, how close everything is to you. But to further that, I want to get into connectivity. And so notice if in a quarter-mile radius, you only have this number of streets that work, then you're not going to walk or bike. All that traffic is going to be there. But what if you had a well-distributed, well-connected system of streets, trails, and other elements? Now you can, and you have multiple choices of how you're going to take a trip on a particular day. But you have to have destinations. And there's where the mix of uses comes in. Many of us are referring to this as the 15. Focus on this, that the more we can get into that pedestrian shed, the what I call the 15-minute radius, the more people are going to walk and be watched over. But for parks, it's even more specific. The Victorian rule, Victoria, Australia, is you need a place people go to as an open space, a park, plaza, whatever, within an 1/8 of a mile of each home. And that way they take more ownership of it. I got to work in this community. It's in Loma Linda. So let's blow it up a little bit. We were able to get the featured homes up on the Capitol Street, but make that the beautiful street, the great street. And that would add the value to those homes. And then notice all the green spaces we created. The street that goes across connects to the second neighborhood that would be built. The one you're looking at directly in the center is the center, the first neighborhood. And then on the left in the gray area, that's one that we hope to capture if we could achieve it. If we could get the right density, in this case, it was 9 or 10 units per acre, then the developer would be able to pay for and help maintain that whole green space. But groups who didn't understand density came and fought it. We had to knock it down. Eventually, the city had to take over the space. We were able to green it, but at a cost of the city as opposed to it being self-contained. Another a person I really greatly admire, Canadian Gordon Price, I think 6-time city councilor, is lecturing our group, pointing out to us as we stood in the street for easily 10 minutes, notice the density of the buildings. And he basically said to us, where's the traffic? and that's the cool thing, that Vancouver has been able to really focus on walkability, biking, transit, and still have driving, but not have it be the big featured element. And that is such an important clue that has come from Canadian cities like Vancouver. Looking more at the Loma Linda example, you can see how homes face onto the park, the street design. So design is the next element I really want to focus and feature on. Design is writing the rules of what a developer can build where you do want to walk. And notice on the left, although some people say that's a pretty high density, that's in units per acre. But on the right, the rules change to where homes have to greet the street, they have to honor the street, protect the street by how they handle parking and so on. And that's even more dense. And so you get the fruits of the labor. Another important design feature, which I learned from Brisbane, I hope I pronounced it right, in England, or Bristol, and that 50% of all the physical space, building to building, should be for people. And I include that space, parking and bike lanes. So only the middle 50% is really for movement of vehicles other than bicycles. So very key principle. And we should do this with every street. Another great innovator of our times, Kevin Lynch, pointed out that we need to be looking at paths, number one, edges, and then the neighborhoods, how they work, and then the element of bringing it all together into a district, and then places that connect us. And it's really important. He uses the terms paths, edges, districts, nodes, and landmarks to capture all of these elements. But I want to make sure that we all learn the great elements that compose a successful place. And they are, each of these elements, a great book to track down, any by Kevin Lynch. Now let's talk about the economic side. I'm going to reflect on a city of Portland, Oregon, figured it all out decades ago. Between 1980 and 1990, they were able to lower property tax, air pollution, and increase neighborhood quality by focusing on the traditional design. Atlanta favored the car design. They had to raise their taxes, their air quality worsened, and the neighborhood quality plummeted. Another person I like to follow is Joe Minicozzi of Urban 3, and he has really put a yield per acre to this formula. And by the way, all of these images are available to you, I hope, Gail by a PDF so that people have more time to read the background and so on. So now, just to keep this a lively presentation, what would it cost if you could buy an acre of Central Park? You can't, but what would it cost? How many millions of dollars? Anyone care to answer that in the chat room?
Yeah, I'm really sorry that our chat
Oh, the
wasn't
chat's not
working,
working.
but now I was able to activate it. But
Oh,
then
good.
usually I ask people not to chat while the
Oh,
guest
good.
is speaking,
Okay.
so that they focus on you. And
Well,
everybody within 48 hours, we have the recording. We'll have the recording up
oh, thank you.
on our YouTube channels. And gpenalosa.ca. But this is fantastic, Dan.
Oh,
Please keep on. We will
I will.
make all the materials available to people.
Yep.
This is very exciting, health, economic development, and
Great.
other benefits.
Yeah. Well, the answer is 627 million an acre, and that was quite a while ago when that was derived in 2005. I think what it would be worth in today's dollars and euros or whatever. The other thing I want to point out is that the more communities focus on cars as opposed to people in place, the more money they're sending somewhere else, like to Detroit or Tokyo. And if we focus on people in place, all that money stays home. So we can build the things we're talking about and need, right, for healthy people, communities, and planet. We've also grossly hidden the cost of driving. Notice that society has to pay $9.20 for every dollar that the driver invests. But if you walk, society only pays a penny. Same with the payout for biking or busing. Very significant changes. I love this little series I put together. Notice there's a slight blip of happiness. It happened in the 60s. I grew up in the 60s. There it is. And this is what the 60s looked like. This is Bryant Park. Because they made some design mistakes in Bryant Park originally, and so it was owned by people who were, well, it looks like they were all spaced out. But today, Bryant Park looks like this, and it looks like this almost 24/7. They did it with just a few little tools. It's easy enough to track down what the secrets are, but one of the big secrets first was the edges. And again, the reason why I love to celebrate the work of Kevin Lynch and why movable furniture and some of the greening and so on that you see in the park really makes a difference. I want to celebrate the social use of space. Social cohesion is another Blue Zone quality that we have to have, but we're not going to have that social cohesion unless we provide what I've been saying for decades now. Number one is security. If people don't feel secure, they won't go there. The convenience can be seen as connectivity, but many other things. The efficiency we've been talking about, but now I want to focus more on comfort and welcome. And so think about all the great parks, all the places you love to go to in your city. Why do people go there? And then think of the ones that people don't go to and figure out why they do not go to these places. And different age groups may select different qualities of a place. They'll populate them, but the principles for all users are the same. And again, most of these images are from Central Park or other areas that New York has reinvented. But we can go to all kinds of cities in the world. And again, the eyes on the street, the building placement is critical, but then multiple uses of a physical space, many ways to share and be with someone, or just to be in space. Amanda Burden, not related, was able to create a recovery of this great area of Manhattan, the waterfront, by making major investments throughout her career and the team she surrounded herself with. But even in this much smaller city, Fort Pierce, Florida, again, by focusing on water, the waterfront, recovering the areas that we so turned our backs on decades ago, it's a great place to start. Let's look at streets. The street you see here was designed by engineers. They didn't understand placemaking. Streets no longer belong to one profession, they belong to all. So if we brought in the landscape architects, the developers, and others, that street transformed to this becomes a node of great success in a community. London is so far ahead of so many other cities in the world right now. It's one of my laboratories. I love to go take walks and see which streets are being transformed, what they're doing, learn the techniques by observing. And but again, we can do this in a small city. Durango's fairly small town in Colorado, but notice there's no parking lot out in front. And this creates place. People linger here. They don't loiter, they linger. And another developer or retailer in this case realized he didn't need the parking spaces in front of his building. They had been there. He took them out and built place. And I think you can see how this transition just totally brought everything. It's not parking that brings customers, it's place. And he's making a fortune today. So I want to go through again, this is kind of a summary of all that we've been talking about. What would you do if you wanted people to walk? Yeah, you do this, of course. And you do this, but the big one is still missing. We've talked about it. Hopefully you come up with the answer. Yeah, people need to watch over a physical space, or be watched over at the same time. Victor Dover captures this beautifully. You change the planning rules. Don't allow the buildings to put their back end to your street. Switch the rules, require a good placemaking. That means the street's going to have to be better. And you can green the street and then add edges. So I think you can see where the principles we've been talking about are now coming together. My good friend, Linda Polanski, this is the next block she bought and in South Beach. And you can see how this has become one of the most gorgeous places in South Beach. And it's one of the most talked about places. But also, eyes even on a small plaza or court bring the difference. This is all affordable housing, but it's right next to market-driven housing, and it's a nice mix. And people of all abilities and ethnicities and so on are able to fully engage in a place that's watched over. Alleys too. This alley in Victoria, Canada, became this alley. And by honoring its historic past and revitalizing that, the buildings were already there. And so is the deck of the alley. Now, trails. And bringing back the mix of nature, referred to as biodiversity. Cities should be green. They should be inviting. The eyes of the homes, notice, watch over the people here. And by doing all of these things, we're able to create these nodes of activity and create opportunities for people to come and travel. I don't want to leave this presentation without also covering the very important topic of greening the streets. Notice the edges on both sides, and where you put the trees matter. Notice the trees on the left create a low speed environment and cool the street. Same street, by the way, on the right. It's just that the trees have not matured, and I think you can see the difference. But also, again, on placement of the trees, notice you would behave very differently on the street on the left as you would on the right, where the streets are set too far back to control the speed. And you can see it in both of these settings. I'm using examples of different types of streets. These are collector streets here. Now, active transportation, really, we're talking about balance, right? And bringing the opportunity for people to switch out whichever mode works for them for that hour of the day or whatever. The street on the upper scene was to be widened in order to handle hurricane relief. But I pointed out to them that if they use the right combination of tools, they could move the same amount of traffic as widening the road. And that's just absolutely true. Once we understand the technical side and then bring all the professions together, we can make it all work. Later, you're going to get into Target Zero and Vision Zero in a future presentation that's coming up soon. But here's the key point. We should be designing our streets to induce the behavior we seek. And we have not been doing that. It's important to use all the tools. One of them is to narrow the lanes. We did this by taking out an excess lane, one we didn't need, and make it a safer road and use narrower lanes. When I go to build a street or work on a design with folks, I want to start from the edge and then work toward the middle and only build the road as wide as it needs to be. So let's talk about that in terms of vision. How fast would people drive on a street like this? One might say, well, way too fast. So what if we did this? Slower? Yeah. What if we did this? If you did this, then finally this sets the stage for even further slowing. And now the developer can come in and command the market. But you have to have the street perform well first. So I'm going to close out by talking about how we do these things. You know, the principle less is more. So look at the width of the pavement here and then here. And obviously the greening, or here and then here. Notice use of color in the third lane and the placement of the buildings. This road has been put on a diet. We took out the excess lanes. Now we can get in the edge, the buffer to the sidewalk so it's more comfortable for people to walk. By the way, one of the groups that often will resist this change are the drivers of buses. But if you point out that the bike lane can have an edge line or its own buffer, then we can often get acceptance. This road had been 3 lanes. We took it down to 2 and we narrowed the lanes. So we went from 36 feet wide down to 20 feet. And in this case, make even driving more efficient as well as safer. Again, what we really need to do is look at every tool, whether it's an intersection, mid-block, the street, whatever tool we're using, and build for people in place first. That's the one big change I wanted to have come across in this session. Now, how do we do it? I think the important thing, and Buckminster Fuller himself said this so long ago, that you never change things by fighting the existing reality. It just doesn't work. In other words, if you want to change something, build a new model. And that's what I really wanted to get across in this presentation. The existing, make the existing model obsolete. And people will respond to that, but we need these models. And then keep the key point in mind. What we're trying to do is reward the short trip and forget the regional trip in the city. That doesn't matter. I like to do that by leading walking audits. Mark Fenton, who you see on the right, he and I both, this is the thing we love doing the most, because here's where we bring change. And we do this in cities of all sizes. The media often becomes involved. And we tell stories as a result of this. And by bringing the change, getting people to accept that there's a new way to do things, we save huge amounts of money by having otherwise delayed the project, as you see here. And again, a closing thought, what would you like your city to be for your children, grandchildren, for their generation? And once we think through that, we're going to design differently. And then finally, one of my great heroes, Bill Murray, he points out that we have to work together, and that we are all important, whether we're an advocate, an elected leader, or a technician. we should be pulling the same wagon. And so, and with that, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Because the idea is how are gonna be able to live healthier and happy, but we need to have cities for everyone. Thanks, Dan. It was amazing.